I don't know if you've been watching the laws a lot lately, but one of the areas that is of deep concern, especially, say, in the area of civil rights, is you have a certain level of civil rights laws that were written back in, mid-1960s. And then people are beginning to change the definitions as to who qualifies for these and shoving them into the law to make the laws do things that were never intended by the people who framed the law way back when, simply by changing the definitions. Welcome back to Steel on Steel. John Loeffler here with you. And we're finding this tendency an increasing troublesome idea, because we do have a principle written into our law of no ex post facto laws, meaning you can't simply make up a law and say the law now applies, but when you violated it back then, it didn't exist, but nevertheless we can prosecute you for it now. The very same thing is happening in two areas. One is changing the definitions of what applies to particular laws, and also changing regulations. Now, you make a law and then turning power over to large, unelected, faceless, unaccountable bureaucrats who then begin to legislate as if it were law. And, of course, businesses have to deal with that. And one thing businesses don't like to deal with at all is uncertainty. It destroys their ability to focus upon the universe. And that we saw especially after, say, for example, we had the crash 2007, 2008, and we did the worst thing we could have done. We dumped Obamacare on the business marketplace, and it literally turned it into paralysis. People were afraid to make a move, hiring or firing, until they knew what was going to happen. There was so much uncertainty going on out there. That was a major contributor to the stalling of businesses hiring into getting the economy going again. Seton Motley is president of Less Government, which is a D.C.-based nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting the First Amendment and reducing government. He's an expert for the Heartland Institute. So how did we get to this point where non-congressional people are making congressional law? Because lawmaking power is vested in the Congress. It provides stability.
And that's part of the certainty the Founding Fathers wanted in the separation and the balance of powers. The House and Senate debate bills. They pass bills. They reconcile the two bills. Then it goes to the president, and he signs it. Then it's a law. Well, if it's elected representatives doing that, you can influence what they're doing. Lobbying is not a bad word. It's in the Constitution. You lobby the Congress for redress of grievances. The problem isn't lobbying. The problem is there's $4 trillion a year of government going on. So you can lobby the Congress, and that's part of the certainty. You can help have a say in the law and how it's written, so how it will affect your economy and your business. What you can't control is when some bureaucrat who's elected by nobody starts randomly adding stuff to the law that doesn't exist and never went through Congress. That you can't control. And that's the height of uncertainty, because any Tuesday, a bureaucrat can wake up and say, okay, this law now means these 3 additional things. And you're doing business in that area, and all of a sudden what you were doing on Monday that was legal is now illegal on Tuesday. It's that kind of uncertainty. And, of course, Obama's the king of that. He is the fiat administration. He is we're going to take X and make it mean X, Y, Z, A, B, C, and D. And that's where you get complete uncertainty. And it's kind of like, remember that red light, green light game when you were a kid?
Yeah.
If the government's in green light mode, the private sector's in red light mode. Okay, we're not moving until they stop dropping anvils. When the government stops dropping anvils, then we'll start moving again. And the Obama administration's never stopped moving.
Yeah, and so businesses in many cases are frozen. Obamacare is becoming not a less certain thing. It's becoming a more...
Well, there's still so many regulations being promulgated around that law. What we do know is terrible. You know, that's why, like you said, they're hiring 29 hours or less rather than full-time to avoid the punitive nature of Obamacare. They're not hiring above 50 people to avoid the punitive natures of Obamacare. But there's still many, many rules to be written, and that's another problem. You should not be writing bills that are so big that 5 years later you still haven't finished promulgating the rules for them, and that's part of the problem, too.
Yeah, but Congress has been doing that a lot more. I mean, over the last, 30 or 40 years, they write this basic law, and then they just dump the whole corpus of it on some new agency and say, here, you guys deal with this nonsense.
Yes, and you run into the same ideological fight on laws and what they mean and the intent of the writers, the same ideological divide as the Constitution. The 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause was written for freed slaves. It's not written for anybody else or anything else. Yet it's come to take on all these warped permutations. The 14th Amendment was to prevent the government from discriminating. Nobody else. It's a shield against government. It's not a sword for government. So you got all that going around. And when you have the transgender bathroom thing under Title IX, because now the 14th Amendment means gay marriage, and now the 14th Amendment means transgender. No, it doesn't. If it did, we wouldn't be discussing this in 2016. We'd have been discussing it the year after they ratified the 14th Amendment. So the left doesn't like the Constitution. They don't like the way the Constitution was written. Remember, we had Barack Obama say on public radio in, I believe, 2000, problem with the Constitution is it's a constitution of negative rights. It says what the government can't do. Obama's problem was he wanted a constitution that says what the government can do. Of course, missing the whole fundamental concept of the Constitution as drafted by the founders.
This was a limit on the limitations government could put on people to have the maximum amount of freedoms out there. Now, to say what it is the government can do, well, it actually does. It says the federal government has these powers, A, B, C, D, E, F. Everything else is reserved to the people in the states.
Right. The 9th and 10th Amendments say if it ain't here, it ain't supposed to be here. My argument for departments and commissions and agencies and boards is if it was created after 1800, it shouldn't exist. Because the guys who wrote the Constitution then went into the government and built the government based on the Constitution. And if by 1800 the federal government wasn't doing it, they knew best the federal government shouldn't be doing it.
But the real world of how are you going to deal with that?
Well, that's the problem, too. That's another failing not of the elected representatives failing to uphold their constitutional duties. The advice and consent power on judges and justices given to the Senate has been woefully underutilized. For instance, neither Justices Sotomayor or Kagan should be on the court. They are ideologically unsuited to be judges or justices or anything with a robe. But the problem is the Senate cakewalked them through. And they've been doing that at the appellate level and all up and down the federal courts for decades. And then you have, for instance, there was a ruling, the state of Kansas says the will of the people, vote in a law that says you have to provide proof of citizenship to vote. And then one judge says, no, you can't do that. And I'm eviscerating the entire law and the entire will of the people of Kansas. Because that judge was not properly advised and consented by the Senate way back when he was appointed to his position.
What that puts in danger is the whole right of referendum, because the people say, this is what we want. This is why you have a referendum, that you go to the people, and one man or woman steps in and says, oh, that's not valid. Poof, it goes away.
Even the referendum process. Remember, we're a republic, not a democracy. The referendum is a democratic thing, not a Republican thing, small d, small r. But the reason referendums have become so popular is because the elected officials don't do what they're supposed to be doing when they're in office. So the referendum is an attempt to end run the elected officials because they're not doing their job.
Well, you have your work cut out for you.
Oh, it's been a bad century. So, yeah.
But it's important that people understand how this was supposed to work, and what this is doing overall is creating incredible mountains of uncertainty, as you say. And it's the uncertainty that damages the ability of business to function. You also see this, say, in the area of taxation and other financial planning, where let's take 401k plans or any kind of plan that government sets up. The rules are literally changing, Seton, every single year. And so you're trying to do your retirement planning. I'm 55 and I got 10 years to go. Just give that as a round example. I know what I need to do here. I need to do it. But next year that changes, and the year after that changes, and the year after that changes. You can't live within that kind of an environment.
And then you wonder why gold's $2,000 an ounce. Businesses don't plan 6 months out. They don't plan a year out. They plan 3, 5, and 7 years out. And it's very difficult to do that if in year 2, your entire plan gets completely thrown out the window by a rule change by a bureaucrat in Washington.
Unfortunately, we're condemned to chase this thing up.
I was not a Trump fan. I didn't vote for Trump. I voted for somebody else in the primary in Maryland here. But the fact of the matter is, it's inordinately difficult to look at what D.C. has been doing for the last 50 years and say, gee, I'm completely surprised that Trump is winning.
Even the Sanders reaction is people are saying this isn't going where it was supposed to go, do something.
Yes. What's interesting is an ex-girlfriend of mine works on the Sanders campaign, and she has about 12,000 people on her Facebook page. She put a poll up and said, if it's Hillary versus Trump, who are you voting for? And 75% of her Sanders people said Donald Trump.
Why?
She was stunned.
Yeah, that's stunning to me, too.
Now, do I think it's going to carry at that number into the election? No. But if it's 20%, am I going to be surprised? No. If 20% of Sanders voters vote for Trump, I won't be surprised. They're certainly not going to vote for Hillary Clinton.
Interesting times, anyway. All right, Seton Motley, website.
The Chinese curse. May you live
In interesting times, yeah. Any closing thoughts? And don't forget some websites.
Yes. Please go to